Hi, welcome to Bits, Bytes, and Bourbon. So I guess a little bit of background is in order here, especially since it's been a while. If you follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or maybe even Facebook, you may have heard me talk about Bits, Bytes, and Bourbon. But it has been an awfully long time since I first started talking about this and getting up here and actually shooting this video. So Bits, Bytes, and Bourbon was a concept I came up with a long time ago. Before it even had a name, I wanted to show, whether it's video, podcast, whatever, where I could not only just talk to people about the things I like, cybersecurity, pop culture, movies, gaming, PC hardware, you name it, as well as beer, bourbon, whiskey, whatever. And just kind of run through those things. I also wanted to be able to have different people on the shows from different point of views, so I could get those differing opinions and have the conversations about them. That morphed into a couple of different formats. At one point, it was Bits, Bytes, and Beer. This was during a time when I was actually brewing my own beer at home. Got involved in, kind of some of the technological gadgets that allowed you to brew beer inside the house and became fascinated. And I thought, wow, I'll figure out how to do this. Well, that kind of fell off after I realized it took about 3 months to get a batch of beer ready. Knew that before I decided on the program, but still really wasn't conducive to the format I was thinking about. Bi-weekly, once a month, twice a month, something like that. Then gradually it morphed into a couple of different ones. Finally at DEF CON or Black Hat last year, I was talking with somebody and started having the conversation around the format that I put my content out in. Primarily it's on a website. It's actually called Decrypted Tech. But I wanted to have a different format, something that would be outside of just sort of a business website or even that general news site where it's a written word. And then the concept of Bits, Bytes, and Bourbon was brought up again. And I said in August of last year that I was going to do it. Well, that's been a year, almost a year. And now here I'm sitting putting the first content onto disc so that I can publish it in time for Black Hat and DEF CON this year. So I think I win the award for some of the greatest procrastination, or maybe I'll end up on one of the Critical Drinkers production hells. Half the things that I put off and didn't do were building a set, building a bar, I needed to buy more bourbon, pretty much anything I could lie to myself to make an excuse as to why I wasn't actually doing this. Now let's add a little bit more context into this as to why this video is coming out, why it's coming out now, and what we're going to talk about in just a minute. A couple of weeks ago, just out of nowhere, I decided I was going to come to Black Hat and DEF CON with drink recipes in hand. The first drink recipe I came up with, kind of put the ingredients together before it was given a name, asked my followers on Twitter, or X if you want to call it that, hey, give this a name. The winning name was actually the Root Kit Rye. The runner-up was actually the Red Team Rye, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the whole point behind the cocktail was a rye-first cocktail with a little bit of cognac or brandy in there to add some additional smoky or some of that brandy heat that you get when you're already dealing with a peppery liquor with rye whiskey. On top of that, we added in a couple of other things. You have a dry vermouth, a very small amount of dry vermouth to give it that dry flavor over top. And then I used chocolate bitters in it in order to add some additional flavor on top of that. And then we have the Root Kit Rye. Sandwiched in the middle of that, I threw in some cherry to add a little bit of sweetness. Now the way the flavors are layered is you get the heat from the rye, which is followed by the dryness from the vermouth, and then you get the mixing of that brandy or cognac flavor in with that sweet, with that I want to say that bite of like a dark chocolate overtone from the cocoa bitters that I use. All right, now some of the ryes that I like to use are not the easiest to find ryes. I got a Willet Rye back here, a couple of Whistle Pigs, including an 18-year. That's a double malt rye. But I have built and tested this cocktail with some easier to find ryes like Rare Breed from Wild Turkey. It's a fantastic rye. You have your Knob Creek ryes, which are great and easy to find. And then there are a number of other ones. Believe it or not, Jack Daniel's Bonded Rye is a fantastic one for this. I don't have a bottle here, but I did have a sample, and it mixes well. The big thing is that peppery rye taste that you get from a rye whiskey. In this case, one of my favorite ryes is Old Ezra 7 Rye. It's a full-proof rye, meaning that this is the proof that it was at when it came out of the barrel. There's no cold filtering, there's no water filtering down. It is what they call a blended bourbon, where they take multiple barrels and blend it into a final taste profile from those multiple barrels, but they don't add anything to reduce the ABV. Now, quick word on things like single barrel, full proof, cask strength, and all of that. They're not regulated terms, but they are marketing terms that are there to indicate a particular type of alcohol. In this case, this is going to be a higher proof, not significantly. This is 57% ABV, so 114 proof. It's a little bit higher than your standards, which are going to be 100, 90, and so on. Not significantly higher. I do have a Kings County over here that's much, much higher than this, but at the same time, this has a lot of flavor, and it also has notes of caramel and other things in addition to the heat and the pepper that you get from a rye. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything I need to get the build going, and let's build this cocktail. And while we're at it, let's talk a little bit about root kits and general cybersecurity. All right, so let's start our cocktail build. We want to do this in a mixing glass. It is a whiskey cocktail. When you're dealing with bourbons and ryes, one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure you have something so you can do a slow stir. There are some shaken rye and bourbon cocktails where you're looking for froth. In this case, you don't want to aerate it, so we're going to do a gentle stir. It's going to be 2 ounces of our rye. And I am not a professional bartender, so I am going to be slow at pouring a lot of this stuff. We're looking at a 1/4 ounce of our brandy or cognac. Half an ounce of our cherry. Now, in this case, I'm using Dr. McGillicuddy's. It's not the best cherry liqueur out there. I actually would prefer Hearings. However, Hearings is almost impossible to find where I live. So we're going with Dr. McGillicuddy's. There we go. All right, last of the alcohol component, well, general alcohol components is going to be a bar spoonful of dry vermouth. I'm using Dolan. Dolan is great. You can use Gallo, pretty much anything. If you over pour, which I have done before, I generally leave it because nothing says IT or cybersecurity operations like a little bit of an oops. All right, then we'll put in our 3 dashes of cocoa bitters. There we go. We'll give that just a little stir before we put in the ice. Now we're going to go grab ice, and we're going to get ice for our glass. In this case, you're going to pour it into a rocks glass. And we'll be right back. All right, so we've got our ice, and let's go ahead and stir. Spoon on the outside, and just kind of swish everything around. You're mixing water in here as well as chilling the drink. Just a personal preference, I like to get my garnish ready. In this case, I'm using Traverse City cocktail cherries. And I like to pour the cocktail over top of the garnish. And of course you have to have the clear ice, because what's a little drink without some good presentation? The clear ice, just for those that are out there, doesn't really matter. It does make it look neat. Having the bigger rock does make it melt a little slower, so your drink stays colder for longer and doesn't get as watered down. Stir this for about 10 to 20 seconds. And once you start feeling it get cold on the outside, go ahead and cap it off and pour. We dunk our cherries in, give that a little stir, and there you have the Root Kit Rye. All right, so let's talk about why some of this came up and why Root Kit is such a big deal. Not that long ago, well actually, I mean we can go back a couple of years, but there's been a growing concern around the number of systems, the number of drivers, number of devices, software, all of that actually have direct access into what's called Ring 0. This is pretty much your highest privilege for the conversation between software and hardware. Many of those things are going to be anti-cheat modules, which for whatever reason they feel that they have to have the need to run at Ring 0, but they're also booting up before anything else. So they're in that boot first mode. So they come up They're looking at everything going on. They're checking memory. Back when I used to work at Silence, we actually saw some of these do things that appeared to be process hollowing, that appeared to be dumping LSAS. There's no reason for that to happen. So they're operating in a very, very privileged space. And then when you add in that some of these companies that are building these anti-cheat drivers to stop people from cheating, and cheating's an entirely different story, which involves malware, info stealers, and a bunch of other stuff we'll get into in a later article and probably a later video. But a lot of these things, they're sitting there, and these companies are actually owned by foreign countries, you know, for their root. That makes it a little iffy. I'm not saying that these foreign countries that own this gaming company or own the company that's creating the anti-cheat are necessarily bad, but it's not like you want to have that running on every single system. And if you're talking about BYOD, bring your own device, where somebody's playing a game and it happens to have that particular type of anti-cheat running in kernel mode, you know, in that ring zero space, it's a danger. Now, recently we have had an issue with CrowdStrike, and if you haven't heard about that yet, you know, please crawl out from under the rock or step outside and take a look at the news. CrowdStrike, one of their drivers, which is they're an EDR or an MDR, XDR, whatever you want to call it, that also runs in ring zero. Now, that's a protective function, but due to a mishap in a template, which managed to make it through a minimal stress test, a content chat validation, and then was pushed out to a kernel mode driver, it threw an out of bounds memory error, caused boot loop, brought down 8.5 million computers, and the impact of that as of, I believe, July 24th-ish, was about $5.8 billion for that little oopsie. 3 little configuration files, which were then ingested by that kernel mode driver, threw everything into a panic, and until you deleted those, removed those drivers, those machines were not functional. So when we start talking about rootkits, they're pretty serious things that end up on your devices. And there are other ones. It's not just for Windows. You have rootkits that can actually operate in multiple different operating systems, depending upon the complexity. It's easier to write them for Windows because there's things that you can do to affect that ring zero. There are, you know, you can compromise a company, you can get into supply chain attacks that allow you to push information into those, you know, ring zero drivers, those ring zero applications that then have visibility into everything. And for those out there that are highly technical that are going to watch this, understand that I'm talking in simplistic terms. I'm not going to get into the difference in languages, the differences in coding. We're not going to start talking about memory safe languages or Rust versus C++ or any of that. We're just looking at kind of the basics of what's going on here while we enjoy this. So like I said, for this one, this was pretty much, let's see what Twitter comes up with. The next drink that we've got on the scales, we won't be making this tonight, but for our next video, it's going to be something called the Two-Factor Master. That's an interesting one. Also in honor of CrowdStrike, we've got one that's called the Channel File Update, which is also an interesting one. And I have a failed drink that I still have to figure out if I can actually make it work. That's called the BSOD. But again, I have to do a few more calculations on that one to make sure that when I dump everything in, it actually pours over and mixes the way it's supposed to. Anyway, for now, just to let everybody know, I will be out at Black Hat and DEF CON. If you see me while you're out there, I will have some stickers on hand. If you want to grab a sticker for Bits, Bytes, and Bourbon or for Decrypted Tech, feel free to ask me for one. If you want to grab a drink, if you want to sit down and talk about something, it doesn't necessarily have to be about cybersecurity, although it would fit the venue. But I'm happy to talk about almost everything. There are a few areas that I kind of shy away from just because those tend to be contentious. But happy to talk about games, gaming, all of that kind of stuff. And of course, my favorite, bourbon. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Cheers.